I think Sue Barrett gets the prize this week. She emailed me on Tuesday saying that she read through the texts for this week. There were 4 chapters, 2 Samuel 20 through 24. I guess maybe that's 5 chapters to close out our study of 2 Samuel. And she said, those texts were awful, and she's listening to the news, and she experienced a similar awfulness. It was truly a week where the texts and our context, our modern times, our modern news, seem so very intertwined. These closeout texts in 2 Samuel are about war. They're about trauma. They're about age-old feuds. And they have some barbaric images going on. Meanwhile, in our news, sadly, the last week plus, there is war. There are barbarous acts. There is a trauma that's been going on for generations, multifaceted trauma, awfulness. And we do pray for Israel, Palestine, Gaza. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayers. It was one of those weeks where I just want to put the Bible on trial. Does the Bible just fuel violence in its stories? Does the Bible rationalize retaliation and retribution in its stories? Will we be better off not looking at the Bible because it has such grisly images in some of the stories? So let's take a close look at some of the stories, 3 of them, from 2 Samuel chapters 20, 21, and chapter 22 is a lovely psalm. The first story there features a character named Sheba. So Sheba is some guy who gets it in his mind to rebel against King David. Well, King David, he is getting sick and tired of rebellion. Last week, we saw the near coup of Absalom. David's son Absalom almost unseated his father and took over in a very violent, manipulative, brutal coup. But Absalom got quelled. Well, the instant that Absalom got quelled, well, this Sheba character rises up and starts insulting David. Who's David? We don't need David, come on. And so he musters other tribes to follow him, and he tears out of Jerusalem and tries to set up his own fortress, his own forces, and he ends up in a city called Abel. David sends his troops out after Sheba, and they're led by Joab. So if you've been around the block a few times, you may remember Joab. Joab is the commander of David's army. Joab is fearsome, a little scary, violent, but loyal, and he does get the job done. So ferocious Joab, who has quite the list and body count in his life, he's out there at Abel, and they're building up ramps to completely sack the city of Abel. And he's going after it. The soldiers are there. They're ready for this big invasion of a city. When all of a sudden, a woman of the city calls out and says, "Oi, is that Joab? Could I talk to him?" Some random woman in the city wants to talk to David's fierce commander, Joab. So she arranges to meet with Joab, and she says to Joab, "Do you not know history at all? You know the city of Abel. We're renowned for being a place of wisdom. Will you not respect our legendary city and its famed wisdom today? And will you not respect me? I am a faithful, peaceful person. Why are you trying to annihilate our city?" And Joab says, "Oh, well, actually, we're not trying to wipe out your city. We're just trying to go after this guy named Sheba." And the woman said, "Oh, we'll take care of that for you." And you can read the story to find out how the woman arranges for Sheba to head their way, you might say. You can read that on your own. Problem solved. The next story is kind of a strange one. King David feels there's some weird juju in society. Something's just not going right. And he lights upon an age-old generational problem that the Gibeonites are mad at Saul, the former king. There's some bad blood between the Gibeonites and King Saul. So King David attempts to be a peacemaker. He talks to the Gibeonites and he said, what will make it right? What will help you feel better? And they hit on a solution that sounds pretty brutal and grisly. It's the killing of 7 sons or grandsons of Saul. So Saul's 7 sons are offered up execution style, and that mitigates it. So on the one hand, these 2 stories sound brutal and grisly, and I didn't tell you one of the details in one of the stories, and you just think, oh my goodness, that's horrible. But look again, that woman who was living in Abel, she mitigated a disaster by negotiating with Joab. Instead of a whole city getting flattened, they got their target, Sheba, and that solved the problem. I mean, doesn't that sound a little bit like a prayer today? Yes, we know Hamas, brutal, horrible, horrifying, intentionally trauma-inducing, terrible. Yes. And flattening all the city of Gaza? Is that a great solution? So the Bible, in that story, it's counseling a form of diplomacy, a form of wisdom. Don't flatten the whole city. Be targeted in how you address your problem, your grievance. And in the second story with King David, it's horrible that he offers up 7 of King Saul's sons. But for some reason, that prevents a wider spread, more people getting involved in the violence. That was enough to tamp things down. So the Bible in these stories illustrates negotiation, conversation, non-escalation, figuring things out, targeted responses to horrific things. I think that is what I'm hearing from the world of diplomacy this week. I have carefully listened to several different diplomats and read articles this week on people who are wise in looking at the history and politics of the Middle East. One takeaway I got from one veteran diplomat, Richard Haas, and done a lot of different things. One thing that might be more familiar to us, he was active in the Good Friday peace negotiations in Northern Ireland. Anyway, I heard one interview with him, and he said, yes, one could retaliate. Absolutely, one could retaliate. But then you ask yourself, does that really solve the problem? And it makes me think, whether it's in the Bible or now, it's part of our human DNA, maybe part of our amygdala, that we are wired to retaliate. We are wired to respond to violence with additional violence because we are afraid of looking weak. If we don't retaliate, we look like fools. And in our fear of looking like fools or looking weak, we feed in to the retaliatory, escalating model. I was thinking about this. Retaliation feels good, but then it kicks the can of the problem down the road. Because what you're doing in retaliation is you're creating generational trauma. If you're unable to solve the problem and then you punch back harder, you're just punishing your children and your children's children because you are too scared of looking weak. How do we respond to violence? One image I've had in my head, and I think it relates to violence as well as other negative, unpleasant, bad dynamics. So a lot of times I visualize the negative dynamic as a swirl, and there's like a swirl. So picture like a swirl of violence. And as I was thinking about that swirl of negativity, the swirl of violence this week, I was thinking that that kind of swirl has a quality of sucking you in. Something is violent, someone is rude, someone is disrespectful, someone has dehumanized you. You can get sucked right into it because that's the nature of that vortex, that swirl. It sucks you in. It's insatiable. And we can get sucked right in and lose our minds. And that's what often happens. Group A loses its mind on Group B, and then Group B loses its mind. Everybody loses their mind, and it feels great to lose your mind. You feel like you're getting something done because then you don't look weak, you don't look humiliated. But then what have you solved, and what are you passing on to society? Unfinished business, more trauma, it carries on. Are you really solving anything? So I try to picture that swirl, and then I try to picture a boundary. And then with that boundary, I have a statement I make. I am committed to healing. I am committed to healing. It helps me not get sucked in to that insatiable, retaliatory dynamic that just wants me to get sucked in so that I give up my principles, I lose my mind, and feel good for a moment. But then, what did I solve? What is the result of that? This is kind of a graphic image, but I'll go ahead and share it. I think it's kind of, if we solve problems in a retaliatory manner, it's kind of like saying you have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. Well, one way to alleviate your problem of having to go to the bathroom is to wet your pants. You feel better, right? Look, I feel better. I don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. And, but doesn't that create some other problems? Yuck, smell, longer term, bigger problems. I think that that's the way retaliation is. It feels good at the moment. It makes us, yeah, look at me. I've solved my problem. But man, if you just walk to the bathroom, and then some problems, maybe they require building latrines, maybe we get at the root of problem solving together. It's possible. It's possible. The third story in our closeout of 2 Samuel offers one more picture for us amid violence. And it's the story of Rizpah. And that's the story we enacted today. So remember David's gambit with the Gibeonites? Hey, I'll solve this problem, this generational traumatic problem. We'll just give up 7 of Saul's sons and then we're done with it. Would that do it for you? Yep, that would do it for us. Well, the loss of those 7 sons, 2 of them were Rizpah's sons. How do you suppose that impacted Rizpah? The immediate, brutal, dehumanizing execution of 2 of her sons. Did Rizpah retaliate? She did not retaliate. Rizpah held her honor and her dignity, and she did something very brave. She went out and she protected the bodies of her sons out in an open field. She took a dignified, courageous action. She did not retaliate. Does that make her weak? Is Rizpah weak because she didn't retaliate? Or is Rizpah strong? Because what she did took a lot of guts and courage and creativity and energy. She went out, she protected the bodies, and her action drew the attention of King David, who'd ordered the executions. David saw what Rizpah was doing, and what she was doing triggered his own grief, his own sorrow, his own need for ritual and processing and figuring something difficult out. So he joined her. And together, they gathered the bones of everybody that they were sad about. David was sad about the loss of Saul and Jonathan. They were sad about the loss of the sons. So they went out to different places to gather the bones. They found all the bones, what was left of the tragedies. And they brought the bones together in a graveside associated with Saul's family. And they buried the bones, shoulder to shoulder. They did something dignified. They did something humanizing. They did something honoring. They did something creative. They did something healing with their feelings. And they stopped the cycle of violence. You might have heard this story before, but we believe in a God whose son was brutally and violently executed. Have you heard that story before? And his son's name was Jesus Christ. So when Jesus Christ was unjustly, brutally, horribly executed, involving his religious sect and the Romans, when that happened, did God retaliate? Did God summon an army? God did not. Does that make God weak? Or does that make God strong? That's the kind of God we believe in. A God who takes the bones and horror and trauma and does things that blow our minds. Beautiful things. As long as we stay open to the possibility of the Spirit, as long as we stay open to the channel of hope, we got to stay in there, and that requires faith. that God can create peace. God can create healing. You know, our main symbol as Christians is an instrument of torture, the cross. The cross. The cross is what they used to kill Jesus. Why do we use a cross? I think it's our way of saying to violence, ha! Ha! To violence. We are committed to healing. We are committed to healing. To God be the glory. Amen. Oh, all our tunes today are Israel.